Good morning. I am Monica Geraci with the RV Industry Association, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar as we take a look at the recent Campground Industry Market Analysis. I'm joined today by Bill Baker, RV Industry Association's Vice President of Membership and Research, and Margaret Bailey, Senior Vice President of CHM Government Services, the firm who conducted the research. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping notes. We will have time at the end for questions, but we're also happy to answer questions as we go. Just go ahead and use that Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen to enter any questions. We are also recording today's presentation, and it will be available. It's going to be sent out in our newsletter, likely next Tuesday, for anyone who wasn't able to join us today. So with that, let's get started. Bill, an easy one to you. Why did the RV Industry Association decide to do this study?
Well, to our knowledge, this level of data has never been available aggregated in one place. So that's where we really wanted to do. We wanted to look at the total inventory that's available on both the private and public side. Obviously, with the growth in RVing that we've seen in recent years and really over the last 40 years, in 1980, there were 170,000 RVs shipped, and up until last year where there were 600,000 plus RVs shipped. That's a tremendous growth curve, over the last 40 years, and we see that continuing. Certainly, if you look at the KOA North America Camping Report, you see a lot of growth and interest in camping in general and RV camping. And then, over the past 2 years with what we've seen, there's a tremendous growing interest in just outdoor recreation in general. So when you put all that into the hopper, the conclusion is you need more campsites. And so we wanted to create a report to see how many campgrounds there are, how many campsites, what are the services and amenities that are offered there, broken down by public and private, by the public agencies as well. And then where are the gaps and opportunities that we can leverage to help improve the experience for our RV and tent campers? Certainly, we have help on the private side with our campground partners, with ARVC, with KOA, with Scott Bart, North American Camping Report. We thank them for the data and assistance they provided. And on the public side, obviously, with Margaret and her team, they're very active on the public side. Did a great report a couple of years ago on the Park Service campground situation. That's what sort of led us to them. So that's really where we ended up. We have a great partner, and we thought that this was going to be really valuable data to collect and use in the years moving forward.
Awesome. So like Bill said, Margaret, a study of this magnitude on campgrounds had never been done before. Your company, CHM Government Services, is familiar with the public campgrounds. Can you tell us a little bit more about your company and also how the study was conducted?
Sure. Thank you and welcome everybody to the opportunity of this presentation. CHM Government Services is a consulting and market research firm who focuses on public agencies with recreation and hospitality assets. And as Bill said, we've been pretty much a business advisor to the public sector at the city, county, state, and federal level for over 30 years. And coming off the National Park Service campground analysis work that we did, it was evident that the public sector is a very important part of the camping experience for the American public. And so we basically we put together a team in regards to Monica's question about how did we structure this. We had 3 team members. We had SOM, who had done a similar type of analysis for campgrounds up in the Canada on the private side. We had Data Crunch, who supported us in doing all the data analysis. And then we had us as the project manager and research lead. A key point that I want to build upon here is, as Bill said, the work of the longitudinal research that exists within the North American Campground Report, sponsored by KOA and done by Cairn Consulting, does a phenomenal job of helping us understand the demand for camping in the United States and in North America. What we were missing was the supply side. So that's really the part of the puzzle that this started to put together. And this was the first time that the supply and the demand came together. So how did we do it? What did we focus on? Well, the North American Camping Report does some work in regards to where people camp. And 70% of the camping in the United States occurs in some sort of structured environment. About 30% is in either dispersed camping or parts of private listings like Hip Camp or Harvest Hose. And so we did not focus on sites that are in that inventory. So specifically what we did is our definition of the campground was as follows. It has to be a demarcated parcel of land owned and managed by an entity. It has to have vehicle access that could be paved or gravel. It has to have a defined site. It has to have basic infrastructure, potable water, and vault toilets as a minimum, and typically involves a fee as well. And you on the private side were like, well, yeah, that's exactly what we have at our campsites. But that's not really what always exists in the public side. And so we had to draw that line. The other issue, and now just so you know, that definition ties closely to the NICS code for camping, 721221. I'm an analyst, that's the way I talk. But anyways, we tried to do an apples to apples comparison, so we were thorough. The other thing I'll say, and then we'll move on, is that our public inventory is a universe. It is literally collecting all the data from all the state parks agencies, from the municipal and private public authorities, and the federal as well. Our private inventory is a sample of the universe of private camping, and then we put them together accordingly. So you'll see in the data like an S for sample under private, and you'll see a U for universal under public. So that's a long answer to a simple question, Monica, but hopefully it sets the stage.
That's perfect. That's exactly the framework that we needed to understand. And now that we do, let's talk about some of the key findings. Bill, what would you say was the biggest finding from the report?
Well, I think the biggest finding confirms, what we all felt intuitively, what we see anecdotally throughout the industry, is that we need more campsites. We need more campsites in the private sector. We need more campsites on public lands. Using, as Margaret just referenced, using data from the KOA North American Camper Report, as well as with data from our study, you see that more capacity is needed, especially during peak season. If you looked at the supply and demand analysis that was done based on 2020 data, those peak seasons of June, July, August, the campground occupancy estimates is about 76%. That's pretty nearing capacity. Annually, in those during the other times of the year, it's a little bit over 50% at 54%. Comparing that to the hotel industry in 2019, the last year sort of normal activity in the hotel industry, they had a peak season occupancy of about 70% and an annual occupancy of 66%. So why is this important? Well, because we know through our owner research, particularly our new owner research, that one of the key drivers of satisfaction of how happy they are with their experience is, can they find a campground where they want to go camping? Can they get a campground at their primary destination? And, the ability to do that is a big driver of whether they'll repurchase another RV. Now, if you dig into the research a little bit, they might not always be able to get that primary, that initial place to visit. Sometimes it's difficult for them to do that. They do report they can find campgrounds, but just being able to go where they want to go and get a campground reservation there is really important. We know that the campground industry is working to address this. From ARVC, we know that in their research that they've done, that they estimate that there will be about 80,000 campsites added to the private inventory this year. That's wonderful news. We want to help boost that number in the years coming forward using this data.
So speaking of data, let's get to it. There are some great charts that are showing on the screen right now, and we're going to walk everyone through some more that show the exact breakdown of how many campgrounds and campsites there are in the United States. What I found really interesting was that 55% of the 27,000 campgrounds in the US are public, but those public campgrounds only make up 29% of total campsites. Can you talk a little bit more about these differences between the public and private campgrounds in terms of quantity, location, and amenities? Bill, do you want to start off first talking about privates?
There's a lot of data on here, and certainly we'll hit the highlights, but again, this will be available a little bit later for everybody to download and pour over. I think, one of the first things in that top left graphic to look at is when you add the total inventory of campgrounds, public and private, you're just a shade over 27,400 campgrounds total in the United States. Yeah, as Monica mentioned, that split, favors the public side, 55 to 45%. But then if you start digging down into the data a little bit more, the majority of campsites are on private, 70%. And then if you look further down at RV campsites, it's even more, 1.6 million. And there's more than 1.1 million campsites on private campgrounds than on public. Obviously, the public accommodates more tent campers, but the private dominates in RV sites. If you look at where they're located, you see that on the private, it's pretty evenly dispersed, while on public, they're much more heavy into the west, with nearly half of those in the western and mountain states. And no surprise, if you look at the amenities down there on the bottom, you see that, private campsites, have a much more higher incidence of the amenities than the public sites. I think that's somewhat intuitive. I think that, most people realize that when they're going to a public campground, that, the amenities are not going to be what you'll find at a private.
I'll just add the other, if you want to flip back for a minute, Monica, if you think about the supported campsite types, we're going to talk about this as we go through the different sectors of this research. The public lands are really the place where people start in a tent and they move through their life cycle. And so the public sector is committed and devoted to that sort of arrangement of assets. And that's I think the one other thing down here. And the other thing that you'll see, and I think is going to be important as we start talking about private sector campground development, is the public sector doesn't have a large distribution of other types of camping in the sense of cabins or yurts or things like that. So that continues to be a market opportunity for the private sector.
Yeah, so if you look at this, this drills down a little bit into, the hookups and the amenities. Pretty even on the hookups available. 63% of private have an incidence of an RV hookup at a campsite, 61% public. If you look at the breakdown, again, pretty even per campsite. When you look at electrical hookups, 63 private, 59% public. The gap starts to widen a little bit as you get down there. 63% at private have campsite water hookups versus only about a third and on the public lands. And then sewer hookups, about half have sewer hookups at the site on private, but only 8% on public. But again, not an unusual finding. That that's sort of what you would expect. So again, just sort of in addition to the gap between the number of campsites, it's just again calling back to that more general slide. It's just the level of amenities between the public and private campgrounds. Monica's trying to give me vertigo. Just these, again, we've covered a lot of this. This just sort of shows you the type of data that's available and how it's broken down in the full report. One of the interesting things, I think, is that, if you look at the amenities, 60% of campgrounds on the private side have Wi-Fi. I think that, that's a real area of opportunity, is boosting that, both the availability and strength. That is, again, is always a key need of RVers, is to have that Wi-Fi capability when they're at the campground. So I think that's an area of opportunity. Campground length distribution, it's pretty evenly dispersed between 40 and 80 foot plus mostly, but the bulk of those are in the 60 to 69 foot range, and the median length is 60 feet.
The other thing I'll say here is on the reservations, 85% was the estimate of campgrounds that have a reservation system. And that's pretty simple in the sense that if people can't find you, they can't stay with you. And so it has to be easy. So I think that's interesting. And then obviously, again, the private campground might not consider a toilet an amenity, but we consider it an amenity when we start talking about the public and the private.
We just went over the hookup breakdown on that left-hand graphic. About 18% on the private side have pull-through sites. If you look at some other amenities, almost 20% offer RV storage at private campgrounds. 8% offer RV rentals. About 6% have 100 amp service. I think we That's important. I think we looked at that as having a 50 amp hookup, a 30 amp hookup, and a 20 amp hookup. Correct, Margaret? Yeah.
Yep.
And then about 4% offer repair service. And again, this is one of these areas of opportunities I think that should interest campgrounds on the private side. Another key driver with new owners is the ability to get their RV repaired quickly and on time without really interrupting their trip or trip planning. I think that that 4% for campgrounds, I think that's an area of opportunity, to offer RV repairs at your property. That can be either if you hire your own technicians, have your own repair facilities, realize that's an investment. That's one option. The other option is there's a growing number of mobile service technicians. Perhaps you can have an agreement with them to come in, provide that service, to those campgrounds. I think that, that is again, a real area of opportunity, and something providing that service, helps with that consumer satisfaction in the long run.
Absolutely. So that was a great overview of the private campgrounds. Now we're going to switch over to the public. So Margaret, you want to talk us through what we know about the public campgrounds?
So I think, again, it's highlighted a little easier to see here. I think it's important to look at the supported campsite types up above. And I think as we look about this, as we think about the Great America Outdoors Out and other infrastructure bills, they are going to be improving the quality of the facilities at these sites, typically more than adding capacity. So typically that will mean improving the electrical system at an RV site, maybe expanding the sites, hardening the tent, improving the tent sites. But again, the likelihood that alternative camping, cabins or glamping is happening, at least at the federal space, is slim. It's beginning to make its way into the state park sense. But that is, I think, going to be a lagger on the public side. As we talked about, the average campsite size in the public, which is relatively small. A big reason for that is the largest provider of campgrounds, not campsites, in the public space is a Forest Service, and their inventory is relatively small. The other issue here, I think, is when we start looking overall at public, you'll see that 50% is over in the West. But I think the important thing to see here as you look at this chart is what we consider public. You can see it's all the federal agencies. You can see that the municipality is, and then, so this chart here is the one that illustrates percentage ownership of campsites. State park systems are your largest provider of state park campsites. As I talked about in the beginning, they're a relatively progressive side of the public agency. They stay up to date with trends. A lot of these states are using COVID relief money as well as other infrastructure bills to upgrade their campsites. And you're seeing that out there. City and county parks are a large provider of campsites, but it's highly distributed. The average municipal campsite is about 45. So those are smaller campgrounds as well. And you'll see, the destination where people keep saying they want to go, the National Park Service, actually has a relatively small number of campsites. So, when you're thinking about development as a private sector, you need to not only consider these national park destinations, but these state park destinations as gateway communities that could also provide opportunities for development.
Yeah, I think, Margaret, that was sort of one of the other key findings is that, the public and private campground system work in concert with each other almost. It's not really, it shouldn't be viewed as a competition. I don't think the RV owner makes that distinction. They just go camping. I mean, I think they make some distinctions between public and private, but I think that one of the things, and you use this word, Margaret, and it's really, I think, appropriate, is, these public campgrounds are demand generators, right? I think that they have tent sites that introduce people to RVing and camping, and you do that a couple times, and the old saying is, I like nature, I just don't want to sleep on it. So hopefully they'll move into to RVs. A lot of people buy RVs because they want to take that bucket list trip to a national park campsite, Yosemite, Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon. Great destinations, not a lot of on-site camping there, and but that provides opportunity to those gateway communities for those those campgrounds there. And then what happens after they take these bucket list trips, they settle into a more of a pattern where they're going about 200 miles from home, and they're going to private campgrounds, they're going to state campgrounds. And I think that one key thing is having a big inventory of campgrounds is going to keep people in the market. I mean, the more opportunities and places they have to camp is very important.
On the public, again, this is all the public agencies. I think the most important thing to see here, and you can start seeing that the RV campground distribution is more distributed because the sample size is all the agencies which are geographically distributed. But it's important to realize that, again, in the federal space, very small inventory of campgrounds with the evidence of an RV site. It goes up to about 80% when we start talking about the state municipal. Next slide. So here's what the report basically takes the public sector and breaks it down between federal, state, and municipal. And I think if we keep our eyes on the top part of this chart, and then on the geography, you're going to see a couple interesting things. In the federal, not a lot of alternative camping alternatives, and the lowest percentage of RV sites, highest percentage of tents. Obviously in the federal, it's the West, 71% of the campgrounds are out there. If you start looking at the other thing is you look at the reservation system, 55% estimate of federal sites are on the reservation system. So not only is it not hard to get a campground, can't get a campsite, but to actually make a reservation continues to be a challenge. So that number's inched up significantly. There's a national priority in the federal space for getting more campsites on their reservation platform, rec.gov. But if you can't reserve a site and you have to go first come, first serve, and you get there and you can't be there, they're coming to you on the private sector side. So that's, I think I'd go on to the next one. Again, we talked about this very small inventory of RV sites on the federal space, only 33%. Next slide. On the state campground, if you go look at the supported campsite types, it begins to look a little bit like the private sector. You've got 80% RVs, you got 33% of cabins, yurts, or alternative accommodations. Obviously, the distribution is there, higher percentage of reservations, 73%. And the campsite length begins to get larger. And then the last one, the state RVs, we talked about this, 80%, 67% have RV hookups. Next. And then municipal, again, this starts looking a little bit more like the federal space. High RV, not a lot of alternative accommodations. There was a very small amount of reservations in the city and the county space. The majority of these are in city and county systems versus a Pacific Gas and Electric or another municipal authority. Low level of Wi-Fi. So again, this idea of how does your amenity stack up and how do people move through public to private depending upon what they need and what they're trying to do is something that you can see very clearly now with this research.
Ooh, all right, that's a lot. There's a lot of information. So now that we have this data, what are the actions that we can do and based off of what we now know? Bill, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think that, we look at this data and this report as a key tool to encourage investment, both on the private side and the public side, to encourage investment, to boost the number of campgrounds, to boost the number of campsites, and to really, I think one of the key immediate areas of opportunity is to look at, enhancing those amenity and services that are available on both sides, public and private. Obviously, it's going to be a central part of RBI's government affairs efforts at the federal and state levels. There's, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, there's money out there available through the Great American Outdoors Act. There's money available through the infrastructure bill to get some of this done.
I think the other thing that we've talked about internally with RBIA is, as we know, the campground industry, let's say a decade ago, was kind of considered its own separate industry. Right now, it is viewed by the public as the outdoor hospitality industry. And there is a significant amount of private equity interested in this real estate asset class. The reason we opened up with the comparison between the hospitality industry and this is because it is part of the hospitality industry. What I think the North American Camping Report, sponsored by KOA, and this study do is they they put a nice little bow on your information package that if you're a private sector campground and you're going to talk to your county commissioners and your municipal authorities, the message is camping is an outdoor hospitality land use, and we are no different than a hotel. And if you're interested in getting a hotel developed in your community, you need to think about campgrounds and what they're evolving into as that sort of asset class, because that's really what it is. And these pieces of information, if you're not taking them in with you, you should be taking them in with you.
Yeah, that's what we've heard as we did this report and talked to stakeholders, is that, it's that local level approval system. That's a big barrier, is getting that done. So hopefully this provides some data to help, push that over the goal line in a lot of cases. Obviously, another one is the sheer expense involved in expanding campsites or building a campground. Average campground campsites at a private is about 125 sites, and it's several thousands of dollars per site to build. So hopefully, this can show those investors, show the real estate investment community that campgrounds are a good investment, and that they're needed, and there's a lot of demand for it from the RV and tent camping side.
The other thing I'd add is that we've talked a lot about federal investment in public camping. The reality is, and I mentioned it early on, is most of that is going towards fixing stuff that is broken. There is some new development happening. It's improving the amenities and the experience, but there's no way, based upon the amount of money that's out there in the public domain for reinvestment, that the number of campsites on the public side is going to increase exponentially, not only because there's just not that much public money, even with this significant investment, but what's involved in getting a public campground developed from an environmental perspective is always going to be cause that side of the industry to lag. So, if we were going to do this 5 years from now, there could be, my guess would be there would be a minor increase in the public. The amenities probably would be improving, but the growth has to come on the private side.
Well, thank you both. We do have a few questions, and I encourage everyone to go ahead and, if you have questions, something that wasn't covered, go ahead and throw it in that Q&A box and we will get you an answer. So going back, this was on the private campgrounds. So Bill, when you refer to RV rentals available at private campgrounds, are you referring to general RV rentals or only on-site rental accommodations?
We'll let Margaret look at her, man. Look how eager she is.
Margaret.
Yeah, what we're saying is this is probably an evidence of the fact that you can book a site with an RV on it.
Yeah, on-site rental. That's what
on-site rental. Yeah. Yay, we agree. We got the same answer. Good deal.
All right, next question. What type of campgrounds / available campsites are included in the private campgrounds? More specifically, are motor coach resorts, harvest hosts, etc., included in those numbers as well?
Okay, good question. And this is clearly stated in the report when you get it. The campsites that this does not include is backcountry, hike-in, boat-in, boondocking, parking lots, and privately owned sites that are part of a listing of private landowners. So that means it does not include harvest hosts. It does not include hip camp, because in essence, so anyways, hopefully that provides a little.
Yeah, but it doesn't include that. For as far as the motor coach resorts, it could. I don't know. I guess it could. If they would fit the definition and they were, I think that would include the motor coach resorts. It would be qualified as what we considered a campground.
So keep the questions coming, and I appreciate this next one because it was next on my list. When and where can we access the study, and then also the recording?
So Monica and her team, they do a great job. They'll have a recording of this available. They'll send that out in our newsletter. Along with that will be a link where you can download the report. So hopefully you'll be able to find this useful and helpful. And it also it'll be available under the market data tab on the RVA website. We'll put it up there as well.
I
We
just
have-
want to add. I want to add a couple other things here. You know, as I understand it, we have a combination of RV manufacturers out there on this webinar. We have
suppliers,
RV campground owners, maybe some public sector officials. I just cannot just please avail yourself of the various data sources that are out there when you go make your pitch. You know, as we talked about, you know, the significant data that RVIA is putting out together on the consumer, this report, the North American Camping Report, KOA is also sponsoring monthly trends reports. ARVC every year issues an annual campground study. So the data is there, and the more professional data you can take to your investor community and to your local officials, the bar on the professionalism of the outdoor hospitality industry, which camping reflects, is going to be raised and hopefully help you achieve what you're trying to do in development or improvement on your sites.
So
go ahead.
Oh, so we got another question that came in. Bill, did you want to add something else before we get to that question?
No.
So did you inquire as to how many campgrounds have EV charging stations?
We did not.
We did.
We did not.
So,
I mean, certainly, you know, I think that much like the RVs Move America economic report that we do now, that, you know, comes on about a 3-year cadence, Monica. I think that, you know, I think that this will go into our series of research that we do on a regular basis, and I think that obviously that'll be included in upcoming research. We'll look to gather that. I mean, you know, with Thor and Winnebago and the move towards, you know, electronic RVs, and certainly the move towards tow vehicles that are going to be, you know, that are going to be towing RVs that are electric. You know, that's one of the things we really have our eye on, and it's going to be important over these next, you know, 5-10 years, is to address that. You know, Thor just did a research study that 44% of people that, you know, they think that there should be a charging site at the campsite, right? And, you know, so, you know, that's one of the things we need to work with our industry partners on the OEM supplier and campground side, is, you know, how do we address the oncoming EV situation.
I was going to add one other thing here. You know, going back to the research, I think one of the things that is emerging in the KOA North American Camping Report, and we're hearing on the public side, and is something to keep track of as a private campground owner and developer, is really the reason the hip camps and the harvest host and the explosion of dispersed camping and the product offerings that allow you to go off-road is happening is because the developed site is constrained. So, you know, as you think about where you're thinking of putting your sites, being aware of where dispersed camping is. I think dispersed camping is partially a choice, but sometimes a default option. And so you know, if you look at the data from 8 years ago of the distribution of demand in those land uses, it's not the same as what you're seeing now. So there's definitely a shift happening, partly by design and partly by default. And so that is something that the challenge, though, as we're aware of, is some of those sites are permitted and some of them are not. And so that continues to be a challenge. Obviously, as a private sector developed campground, you have to get all your permits and everything else. So I'm not advocating for them. I'm basically stating we just have to be aware of what's happening and the influence that has on the developed camping environment.
Couple more questions. Is there any data that directly reflects the growth of RV sites yearly versus the growth of RV production?
Not currently. Obviously, we have the RV production numbers going back 40 years. I don't know what the availability would be for the, you know, RV campsite inventory, you know, on a yearly basis. I know our ARVC tracks that. I don't know how far back they track that.
Yeah, on the private side, I think ARVIC is really a great resource. On the public side, it is a Herculean task to assemble public sector data. Let's just put it that way.
All right, Bill, this next one's you're gonna be able to pull on the demo study here.
Yeah.
Have you seen an increase in RVs being used as longer term housing options? Is that driving the demand for campsites? What does the demo story tell us about full timers?
Full timers are about 3% of the market. So, and that's split between about 1.5% that do it, sort of, like going back to Margaret's thing about the dispersed camping, there's the 1, 2, and have to, right? Some people want to go dispersed camping. Some people have to because they can't find a campsite where they want it. Same thing with, RVs and full timing, so about 3% of RV owners are full timers. 1.5% of those are people that want to do that. They get enjoyment about, from traveling full time in their RV. And about half of those are ones that don't. And typically, they have to do that it's a housing option for them. And so I don't think that drives demand for campsite. I think that the recreational use of RVing is really what's driving the demand for campsites. The folks that have to live in their RV, a lot of time it's on private property. It's not on a campsite.
I think the other thing I want to add to that is, and we talked a little bit about it at the very beginning here, we've talked about how the number of RVs out on the landscape is increased significantly over the last 5 years. But what also is happening, is all of you on the phone call know, is the number of times that RV vehicle is being used is grown significantly because of the RV rental market and the peer-to-peer rental. So that is the other piece of this puzzle that is really, the demand is increasing at a higher rate than the supply. And that's really one of the things that we looked at, and it's part of the information in the study. And this was done, the report was finished at the end of last year, but we looked at the rate of growth of camping demand compared to the rate of growth of supply. And that's really your best indicator of what's going on in regards to the gap and those initial occupancy and demand numbers.
Another question says, I believe the data shows about 6% of private campgrounds offer 100 amp service. I've received conflicting feedback on the actual need for 100 amp service. What is your opinion on the importance of adding more 100 amp sites?
I think that is probably a consumer demand research question versus a supply side. So that's probably an emerging question for, the North American Camping Report, and obviously Bill Ipswich and other user stuff that you have.
Yeah, and I think that's just to clear, we're talking about 100 amp service, to plug into for using the vehicle, 50, 30, 20. Not talking about 100 amp service or whatever, in terms of charging a vehicle, that two different things. I just want to make sure that we're talking about electrical service to use the unit, not electrical service to charge. But yeah, I think that that would be more of a usage question than a supply question.
But I guess the question is, Bill, are you asking that question in your research? And if not, is that really a good question for, for the industry to share with KOA to put into their study so we can start getting
KOA, we can talk to Scott about putting in, his, he might already have it, the stuff he does with KOA, but certainly that's something we could add to our rota of consumer surveys that we put out. See, crowdsourcing questions. Wonderful. I love it.
Yes. All right. Last call for questions. Margaret, Bill, do you want any final thoughts to share with our attendees today?
No, I just want to thank everybody for attending and participating in this. Hopefully you found it valuable. Hopefully it gave you some information. Hopefully it arms you with information to go out there, as I said, in our practice session, to go forth and prosper. The other thing I want to do is I want to tip my cap to Margaret and her team. They were wonderful to work for. There were some days that we felt like we were pushing the rock uphill, but they kept pushing. And so thanks to them, they did a great job. Thanks to Toby O'Rourke at KOA. Thanks to Scott Barr at Karen Consulting. Without the data to marry with what we found, we couldn't have done some of the analysis that we did. Thank you to Paul Bamby at ARVC and David Basler. They were a huge help in providing data and bouncing ideas off of. And we think it's a good report. We look forward to doing it again. I don't know if we'll be able to afford Margaret next time we do it, but we're going to try. but we learned from this one. I think the next one, we'll hone it down a little bit better, and it's a good baseline, and hopefully we're going to see some really good growth when we do it again.